so let's get to it. This is from a question number 7. One day you come into work and you find the major systems are down. However, you also see the ticketing system has 50 or more unassigned tickets. What would you prioritize and how would you go about dealing with this problem? So here's the thing. If you're being interviewed and somebody asks you this, they want to know what you find as a biggest priority and what you should do when it comes to production impact. So this is incredibly important. The way I would explain this would be in 4 different steps. Be first, second, third, last. So that's how I would explain it. The reason for that is so that the potential employer can realize that I know what I'm talking about, that I have the basic knowledge, not to sound egotistic or anything. It's just that I have basic and even general knowledge on how to deal with a situation where you have to prioritize your work. So first, I would ask which systems are down and how many users are impacted. This will determine which issue is to be worked first. Tickets would be the last priority. So here's the thing. If a large number of users is impacted by a system that is down, then that's definitely something you would prioritize. So think about it. Let's say there's a company with 1,000 people and major system is down. That means we have 1,000 people that need to be they need to go back to work basically as soon as possible. So this is why we need to prioritize this. This is one of those common sense type of things, but yet potential employer wants to know this. And this is also good to know if you already are working help desk or some kind of desktop or tech support, right? It's definitely more people than 50, right? And then after you're done with that, tickets would be the last priority. Second, if multiple system issues are related, then I would handle this issue on my own if possible, depending on what the issue is. If issues are not related, and in this case I would recruit help from coworkers and possibly assign individually if manager is not present. So this is incredibly important. If users report that multiple systems are down, which is directly related to the question, then there is a correlation there. Chances are that all of these systems, if they went down at the same time, chances are that they are somehow related to either servers, databases, or whatever it is that they all have relation to. So chances are you might want to handle this issue on your own to make it a more proactive situation handling, because it's all related to one thing. So basically what would happen is you see that multiple systems are down, right? And then you realize, especially if you have the experience working for the company, chances are you will know right away, okay, yes, okay, what's wrong here? This website is down, this application is down, and this other thing is down. Are they any way related? Then if the answer is yes, then you can say that, okay, just let me know which ones, how many people are affected, how many users are affected, I should say, and then I will report this issue to the people that have access to these systems. Meaning, let's say database is down, chances are you doing tech support at the location or help desk that you won't have access to this database for a specific system. I mean, there could be hundreds of systems that are used by a company. You know what I mean? So you might as well handle all of this, or chances are you'll have a crisis bridge, or, well, this is what we call it at my company, but there is a bridge or a conference line that you would call, and the person on the other line would basically be the mediator, and they would handle the kind of logistics part of it, as in, they would ask you, well, how many systems are affected, which ones, and then you'd give them all this information, how many people, this and that, and then they would say, okay, all right, I'm going to start the bridge, and I'm going to start paging people, meaning that he's going to reach out to proper people that you may not know who they are. If issues are not related, in that case, I would recruit help from coworkers. Means that if it's not related, you cannot handle multiple issues, especially if it's a big issue, So you ask your coworker, hey, can you help me out with this? And chances are they will, because hopefully you work at a cool place like I do. Anyways, and possibly assign individually if manager is not present. So chances are a manager would handle assigning of this different situational issues to other coworkers. But if they aren't there, if it's a legit place, and I mean I shouldn't say like that. If it's a cool place to work at, and then everybody is on equal terms, equal expertise, and this and that, chances are they will help you, and you can just ask them, can you help me with this? So it wouldn't necessarily be assigning individually because manager is not present, but you would basically recruit them to help you out, recruit their help to help you out deal with other issues, because you can't possibly handle multiple issues that are not related, right? I mean, that's what I would suggest, especially if it's a huge issue. Because think about it this way: if multiple systems are down and they're not related, how can you possibly acquire information that these application owners or database owners or server owners, how can you possibly give them the information to that? For example, let's say, okay, how many people are affected? And you say, I don't know, 1,000. Okay, give me some examples. So you have to handle this. You have to go to the users, and then you would have to ask them, okay, can you give me this information? Basically, you have to get a lot of information for a certain system in order to troubleshoot this properly. If they are not related, you can't possibly work with two different teams on two different issues efficiently. Third, I would proceed to troubleshoot the issue and get as much information as possible before reaching out to any other support groups that manages specific aspects of systems affected. So that kind of ties into what I was saying earlier. You want to have all the information ready because they will ask you, okay, how many people, which systems, give me example of IP addresses, which link they're using if it's a website, well, which application are you using, which version of the application are they using. All of this information you have to have ready if you want it to go smoothly. Yes, you can forget something. You can forget to get which version of the system it's being used, or whatever else. That's okay as long as you have the majority of things ready. That way it will mitigate the production impact. In this case, support teamwork is essential to resolve major system issues that are not at immediate access to myself or desktop support team. So yeah, everything that I'm talking about here ties in to everything that I said previously. Support team is essential to resolve major system issues that are not at immediate access to myself or desktop support team. After you reach out to all these people that support these different applications, you have to have a good teamwork with them in order to resolve this properly. Lastly, once issues with major systems are resolved and the bulk of users are back to work, then I would concentrate on resolving tickets unassigned. So yeah, I mean, of course, it goes without saying that during crisis issues, all the management would be notified of progress, solution, and root cause. So this is, very important. Once you come across an issue, you would want to report the statuses or give the status updates to all the management, including your own manager, but the management of the people that users report to, because they would want to know, why do we have 1,000 people not working? So you want to send them updates periodically. Usually, this is usually done with just email. You send a group email to all the management of the departments that are affected, and maybe some of the users, and that way everybody knows on which page you're at, or which page you're on, I should say. So that way they know that you're working on it, and usually every half hour you can send, this is going to depend on the place you work at and what your manager requires. But usually what I do is every half hour I send status updates. That seems like a good time frame to do so. So that way they know what's going on, and then once it's all resolved, you would provide a root cause to the management. Not necessarily the management of the users, but to your boss. And so that way your boss can follow up with these application owners and work on, making sure that this doesn't happen again. And then we can concentrate on resolving tickets that are unassigned. Of course, you just go back to work and work these 50 plus tickets. That's a lot of tickets if it's like just you to do. Good luck doing it all in one day. But hey, it's possible. I don't know. There might be some simple ones. So let's go ahead and look at question number 2 that is within this article. And the question is, a user has transferred to another department within the company, and their local profile is missing many files and desktop icons. What do you think the issue could be? So let's go to look at the first. I would ask the user if they moved to another computer, which could mean that their files are stored at another machine. Right, so if somebody literally switches computers, of course that new computer is not going to have those files that are stored at the other machine. It could also mean that the new computer does not have the same software installed, and icons for those would not be present. So if the new computer does not have the same program, of course it's not going to have those icons. So let's have a look at an example of how that looks like. Here's a brand new login or brand new local profile created for this computer. And if I go inside my downloads, for example, it will be empty because it's a new computer. If I go inside of documents, it's going to be empty because I moved to a new computer. If I go to desktop, it's going to be empty because I moved to another computer. And this is just a shortcut to Microsoft Edge. What I'm talking about, missing files. So it's going to miss all those files that you created on the desktop. So let's say, let me show you here what I mean. So if I go here and create a, just a new file, it's going to show up on their desktop. So that's considered, new file. This here is just a shortcut to the file. So of course, you move to another computer. You haven't transferred any of your files. You haven't, moved them to another computer. Of course, it's going to be empty. So that's why I explained it in such a way. Second thing is, let's say you missing icons for the computer. Of course, you're just going to have whatever's installed on this computer. This computer just happens to have Audacity, Google Chrome, OBS Studio, OpenOffice, and etc. But if you happen to have, Microsoft Office and you had a shortcut to Outlook, to Excel, to anything else on your desktop, of course it's not going to be there because this computer doesn't have that installed. Okay, now let's go to the second part of that answer. Okay, and second here it says, if user has not moved to another machine, I would check the Active Directory if any GPO or domain profile restrictions for users' new department are affecting the ability to create, view, or edit files. So let's have a look what I mean. If someone has been moved within Active Directory or their domain, chances are that their permissions to view, edit, or modify files have been changed, which could reflect on the way things look like on their computer. So if somebody moved to another department and that department has new restrictions in place where it doesn't allow them to view a lot of things which can be modified. For example, you would go in here and look at this PC, or previously known as my computer in Windows 7. Chances are they may not even be able to see this. They may not even be able to see local C, let alone any files that are within the hard drive, right? Because changes on the domain level or within Active Directory have suddenly, are suddenly preventing you or the new user to access, view, or edit any of these files. This sometimes happens. Some departments have more restrictions on their users or on their associates. They don't want them to do certain things. They don't want them to view certain things. So suddenly they got migrated to the new part of the Active Directory where they have more restrictions. This has replicated, and chances are whenever they go in here, they won't be able to see any of this. So by the way, one way, if you can't see local C drives or any of these drives listed here, you can just simply type in C. A lot of times that's actually open like that. So let's go ahead and have a look at our third part of this answer. User may have received a new domain login which inherently does not have access to previously used local profile which has the old login ID attached to it. So if somebody, moves to a new department and they decide to tell them, okay, now you're going to use this login. When they log in, it would be just like this. They log in and it would be just like this. Their new profile. This is their new profile that they got. Their new login is their new profile, right? And it will be empty. It will be empty just like this. So what is the reason for that? It's because their old profile has all the stuff. So let's look at root of C again and our users folder. Once we go inside of here, let's say, and this is the fact now, I am using this one, right? YT login. That's my login ID right now. If I previously used this one, everything that's inside of that, it's going to stay inside of that. So now I'm suddenly using this one. Of course, it's going to be empty. So in order to restore that, obviously you will go back inside of this, go into the, if you have the permissions, obviously, go inside and, copy paste all the data that's within their documents and everything else on their desktop and just restore it back here, into their new login. And that's the reason for that. Anytime you change login ID, it's going to, create everything brand new. And, all the old stuff is going to be located on the old profile, which you can transfer back. Okay, now let's have a look at my last thing that I would say as an answer to this question during an interview. Lastly, if any of the situations described apply, I would act accordingly to resolve the issue. If user files are located somewhere else and if permitted by the company policy, very important, I would transfer them back to the user. Same goes for any missing software. So what I'm saying here is that if it's a common practice for their company to create backups, I would restore all of their documents to them, and I would also transfer all the software that they used to have to the new computer if they happen to move to a new computer. Of course, this is all depending on the company's policy. Their manager at the new department may say, nope, they don't need this. So of course you would double check that to make sure that that is allowed as well. So this is a very fun thing to think about because this happens a lot in desktop support where suddenly everything's missing and they don't know what happened because users don't know. And sometimes they'll panic and they would go and they're like, oh, I'm missing everything. Everything's missing. And sure enough, you go in, desktop is pretty much empty, documents are empty, everything's empty, but they don't know what happened. So hopefully you help them or you've been notified ahead of time. So if you're a local desktop support, hopefully you've been notified ahead of time that this person is moving to another department, and then you can help them, by creating, a backup of their local profile or simply moving it from one computer to another, which you can simply do over the network. You can simply go to the back door and just type in // 2 backslashes, name of the computer, name of the computer where they used to sit, and just type in C and $. This should be able to access their old computer. And once you do that, basically it will just, it will basically get you into the root of C like this. It would just say the name of the computer there rather than just C. And then it would say name of the computer with C, /C, and then in here you can just go, what is their old profile, and then you find it, and then usually what I do is, I go like this: desktop, documents. I would highlight all of this, usually their favorites. Then I would copy, and then access her or his or her computer remotely that they're using currently, go back here, find their new profile, whatever that may be, add the other computer, and then just paste it. Usually it didn't like that because I did it on the same login, but if I go into and find another login, it would simply just update the profile or the folders that are there. It's not going to create duplicates. Then that only did that because I did it on the same local profile. All right, so let's get to it. The question is, your office received a new printer and now it needs to be configured for everyday use by a specific department in your building. So keep that in mind, it's for a specific department only. How would you go about installing this printer in a direct IP printing setup? The direct IP printing setup also being something to remember. And the way I would start to explain this, I would say first, I would unpack the printer to make sure all parts and cables are there. Then I would connect and plug in the printer into the power and network port available at designated location. Also, designated location here is very important to keep in mind. So obviously, for when it comes to this, you get that giant box, and these are large printers for businesses. You unpack it, and then you make sure everything's there, right? You make sure it has all parts and cables, and then you put it together, plug it in, and plug it into printer into power network port at the designated location. Second, I would make sure that this new printer has a static IP address assigned to it. And that kind of goes back to our designated location. For this designated location where we have placed our new printer, we have to kind of take note of the port that is there for the network cable that is connected to, right? We would know, okay, well, this is the port number for this, for this location, and then we would talk to our network guy, or we would do it ourselves and make sure that we have a static IP address available and assigned to it. So let me show you what I mean. If you go to your network adapter properties and look at those settings there, you go to properties, right? And you would make sure that you have a static IP address available to you. So if you have a static IP address that you want to use for that port, this can be assigned through the switch itself, and that port would simply just use that and it would never change. And that's the whole point. It's static. We don't want it to change because we want users to connect to it every time. So when you go here into the Ethernet adapter properties and select Internet Protocol version 4, if your company is using IP version 4, you will go in here, and if you have to, you would specify the static IP address. So I'm just kind of showing it to you on the computer itself, but this is what you would do inside the printer. You would say use this IP address if this is something you have to do. This is just me explaining to you what a static IP address is and why you would need it for a printer, so that users can always connect to it and know where it's at. So that way they can install it on their computer afterwards, and I'll show you that as well. And also, I would acquire driver package for the specific model printer, unless the printer is set up to push the drivers automatically upon a request. So if printer for some reason doesn't come with driver package or software, obviously you would go to the manufacturer website, download all the drivers that you need. So let's say it's an HP printer, you would go to HP and specify model, get this information, and then the reason for that is, if needed, we would basically go to Active Directory and tell Active Directory to push this driver. But just kind of hold on to that thought, because most new printers automatically push the drivers. So if it's a brand new printer, it would automatically push the driver to the user that is trying to install it. And I will go back to the Active Directory part that I spoke about. Third, Active Directory needs to know of the printer added. So this is where that comes in. It needs to know that it's added, and it added to the domain itself, right? Active Directory, domain. So what happens is you would take a host name. You would create a host name for this printer. You would assign a host name, and then you would add it to the Active Directory. So that Active Directory knows that there is a printer connected to this domain. So that way it can control who can use this printer through GPO or a group policy. And what this does is it only allows certain users of that department to use the printer. So basically, once you have a group of people, a group of users for a specific department, you can literally just add all of those people into the permissions to use that printer that's been added to Active Directory. So Active Directory is a simple way to control who can use the printer and who cannot. And that kind of goes back to our part where it's kind of related to the driver package. If you have to specifically get the driver package, you can set up Active Directory to push the driver as somebody tries to install it. So, but again, new printers will just do this automatically on their own whenever somebody tries to add it. And that is done by the static IP address or the host name. And this is why I talked about it here. If driver has to be pushed separately, this can be configured as well and in Active Directory. Lastly, I would notify the users of the new printer and its IP address and assist accordingly. So of course, you would have to help them because that's your job. Remember how we talked about a static IP address here? Well, your printer with the static IP address that you assigned it to would be used by users, or you would do it for them. Let me just pull up my printers menu, and here we would add our printer. So the way we would do it, with printers menu, we would simply just select add printer. So now it's searching for the printers, but usually you saw how that popped up, this link, it usually doesn't find it right away. So you have to specifically tell it. So with the users, when it comes to users, you would simply give them the IP address and say, hey, this is the IP address for this printer. Just add it in there and it's going to automatically install it for you. But a lot of times you would do it for them. So you just click this printer that I want isn't listed because it's not going to find it most of the time. And that's okay. And now we have this menu that you may be familiar with. And remember how we talked about that IP address? Well, here it is. We can add the printer using TCP IP address or host name. So we can either use the IP address or the host name. Usually what I do, I just, go by the IP address because it's just the way I prefer it, but it really doesn't matter. So you have select that, and then we would select next, and it brings us to this menu. Here we would, for example, just type in the IP address that we've assigned it, and we would, in my case, I'm just going to come up with an IP address. Let's say it's 192.168.100.1. So let's just assume that that's where our printer is located, and that's its IP address. And something to keep in mind when it comes to installing the drivers, if it's a newer printer, you'll be able to simply select the check mark here if not selected. By default it is, I believe. And what that does is queries the printer. It pings the printer and says, hey, do you have a driver? And the printer says, yes, I do. And it then automatically installs it on your computer. So that's pretty awesome. If you don't, you can later on specify the driver that you want to use, but this should be set up so it automatically does it. And then simply you will select next, and it's going to look for it, and then it's going to install it. Of course, I forget to mention the printer may have a port assigned to it as well, and you would simply type that in after the IP address that I showed you. Okay, let's see. Lastly, I would notify the users, the new printers, and the IP address. I said that already, and that was the last part of this. If you have any questions in regards to this, I know this is a little bit complicated, and that's the whole point. The title of this article is Top 10 Hard Desktop Support Interview Questions and Answers, because you have to explain your steps on how to do this, and I wanted to make these type of videos so you guys can kind of learn from this and to at least make it as easy to understand as possible. All right, so let's get to it. Number 4, what is the best way to install operating system on 100 computers manually? Meaning you don't have an option to boot over the network or any automated system available. So typically in a large business, everything is automated. If you were to receive 100 computers, you can just connect them to the network. You would get host names for them, and you would assign them, which operating system to install, which programs need to be installed as well, and everything would just be done automatically. You just kind of sit back and relax and everything's done. This is why this is a difficult question. And this is how I would go about it. First, I would make sure that all computers are connected to the network and turned on. And that will tie in a little bit later here. I'll explain that. Of course, if these are new computers and I have an option to image them before deploying, I would try to keep them in the same area for easy access. So since I don't have an option of automation, I would make sure that these computers are kind of gathered together preferably in the same room. I would connect them together, power them on, and everything like that. So that way they are there for easy access for me to, schedule a lot or start to reimage process on a lot of them. That's the point of that. Second, I would acquire host names for each machine so they can be added to the domain. This is why I was saying, first, I would make sure that all computers are connected to the network and turned on, so that afterwards, I would acquire host names for each machine so they can be added to the domain. And for this to happen properly, all the computers need to be connected to the network and turned on. So this can be assigned through Active Directory, also known as domain controller. So you would go inside of the Active Directory and you would create 100 computer names, also known as the host names, and then you would assign them accordingly to all of these computers that are being reimaged. And with them being connected to the network, makes it an easy process. Okay. Third, because booting over the network does not work, I would create multiple OS installed medias to use, CD or USB. So this kind of goes back to my trying to keep them in the same area for easy access, and that's exactly why, so that I can use installed media on them. Afterwards, I would manually boot to inserted media and execute OS imaging process. You see how everything kind of ties in. The way I would do things, it's kind of systematical, and everything kind of goes back to itself. This is a great way to tell your potential employer that you have a really good way of thinking on how to resolve these big issues, because trying to install operating system on 100 computers and doing it in an acceptable time frame, you got to know what you're doing and have a good plan. You know what I mean? So lastly, upon image completion, I would ensure that each computer has host names attached and is added to the domain or a work group. Work group usually is used, in a small type of business. So I wouldn't necessarily worry about that if you're interviewing at a big company. But, you got to make sure that is added to the domain and host name attached, meaning that associated with each computer. In addition, I would install any software required per department templates or requests. And that kind of goes back to the part of automation that I mentioned earlier. That normally happens is you select the type of software that you need and it would install it automatically. In this case, you would have to do it manually, install any software required per department templates or requests. So if somebody needs Microsoft Office professionally installed, this is what we would have to do manually for each computer. And, you would have to kind of get that information to make sure you don't spend too much time installing stuff that's unnecessary stuff. You know what I mean? Because you don't necessarily have to install the same program on all of these computers. Because who knows? Doesn't mean that all these computers are going to the same department, so they may have different templates that you would use and go by. Anyway, let's get to it, guys. So this is question number 5. From a desktop support point of view and not Active Directory, how would you deal with user migration to a new domain? And how would you deal with users affected by this change? So it's a 2-part question. And the starting of it says from a desktop support point of view, meaning you're just the guy that works tech support, right? So this is not for somebody who is interviewing for network administration, because when I say here not Active Directory, that would mean somebody who is a network admin. That's the part that they would deal with, and not necessarily somebody who does desktop support or tech support, if you will, right? And how would you deal with the users affected by this change? Incredibly important. The way I explain all of my answers is in 4-part format, where I go from first, second, third, and a last point or explanation that I give to the potential employer that might be asking me this type of question. The reason for that is so that they know that I know what I'm talking about, or that you know what you're talking about as well. So that's a good way to basically present your knowledge to them so they can see, oh yeah, this guy knows what he's talking about. Simple as that. All right, let's get to it. So first part of my answer would be, I would make sure that users and management is aware that the change is coming and how it will affect them. So I would let them know. I would go to the users and their management and let them know that this change is coming, and I would tell them how it will affect them. So the way I would do this is, there are a couple of ways you can do this. You can go to them directly and go to the management first and tell them, hey, we're going to do this. There's a big project coming. We are switching all the users. We're switching everybody to a new domain. You don't have to be too technical about it. You just kind of have to give them a gist of it, because they won't necessarily know the technical parts of any of this. Or you can just send an email to everybody that is being affected. But a lot of times management will say, okay, we will handle the part of letting the users know. So this is just something you would have to figure out. But the reason for that is, when you switch to a new domain, there are a couple of changes that could happen. Users could get new local profiles, and let me show you what I mean here. Depending how it's set up, depending how things are set up, I'm gonna wake up my remote computer is asleep. In case you didn't know this actually pings the computer to it will wake up as soon as you do it a couple of times. It takes like 3 seconds, 4 seconds, and then eventually it gets you to it. Okay, so let me show you what I mean. When it comes to switching to a new domain, if you look at somebody's local profile, in this case I'm using YT login, as you probably caught that earlier, and chances are pretty high that if I get switched over to a new domain, that I may get a new login, or it would be the same login but it would be a different domain. So chances are, what I'm trying to say is that a new profile might end up being created next time they log in, because they switched over to the new domain. So it might look something like this. So instead of just being called YT login, in my case, it could be called, and let me just create a new folder here just to show you a kind of fake profile, just to show you what might happen next time you log in. So it might say YT, I said YT login, and then it might be just something like this, dot new domain, or something like that. And it would specify that, you have now everything that's in this one, original one, is there, but this one is empty. You get it? So that's what might happen. However, in a perfect world, I want to say, I have everything set up so that I have to provide admin privileges to make any changes. So in a perfect setup, this would just basically move all the files to the new login or to the new profile that I just showed you. So all the files that they had in documents, favorites, all their stuff would be moved over, or they would have a different way of just making sure that everything is migrated properly. But you do have to let people know in case things go bad. They would, they would log in next day and they would, wow, where's my stuff? You know what I mean? That's what might happen. So you just got to let them know to be ready for that. Second, I would choose a few machines to be converted ahead of time for testing purposes. This is, obviously, guys, very, very important. Every time you work on a project, you want to make sure that you have some testing done. And the way you do this, pick a few machines to be converted ahead of time for testing purposes. Now, in this case, we are also assuming that computers themselves are also going to the new domain, right? That would perfectly make sense. Since users are going to the new domain, of course, all the computers will be going to a new domain as well. So this is something that has to be tested. And the way you would do that, you would just choose a few machines, and then you would communicate this with the network team. This is why I kind of said from a desktop support point of view and not Active Directory, because chances are you would be working with the network team on this, and they would deal with the Active Directory part of it. So you just tell them, okay, I have, I don't know, let's say 5 machines. Convert them to the new domain, and then you can log in and test it. Third, I would reach out to the department managers to coordinate the switch so that the production impact is minimized. This is kind of self-explanatory. You would basically just talk to the department managers or managers in general to kind of pick a good time to do this. So you don't want to do it during business hours or anything like that, because that would be a production impact. What if it doesn't work? Then you got a lot of people, potentially 1,000 people. Let's say you have 1,000 people at your location that you support. Then everybody might be down. But this is a huge, huge deal. So, we got to make sure we do that. And of course, with those 5 or few machines that you picked, you can have actual users, people to use them and test them. You can do testings yourself, but the best way to do it, in my opinion, is to have actual users dedicated that can test this for you. And you can talk to the managers and say, hey, I need 5 people to test this. And then you would test this over time. This would involve application and website access testing on the new domain before converting everyone else. And the reason you would, involve testing of applications and website access is because the firewall settings. If the new domain already has exclusions for the firewall, then that's fine. But if it doesn't have the same exclusions as the old domain, then chances are some of these websites and applications may not work because the firewall would be an issue. So just kind of keep that in mind. These are things you have to test before you proceed with converting everybody. You know what I mean? So the last thing we want to do is, once all the testing on a new domain is successful, a green light would be given to convert all other machines to the new domain as well as the users. So, once everything's working fine, there are no problems with the testing, you can, if you feel comfortable with it, you can convert everybody at once, or you can just, do, 50 at a time or something like that. This is something, you would kind of decide for yourself. Depending on, it's very situational. All the businesses are different. Some businesses may not be affected that much by it. There are so many factors, guys, that you would really have to kind of decide on your own as you're doing the testing. And this would come just from being familiar with the place you work at, Let's look at this first question that we are going to talk about today. And it's related to when using a remote desktop, you come to realize that the remote computer is not reachable by using a host name. So let's see what happens when you normally try to connect to a remote desktop. I'm going to open up a remote desktop here, and I'm going to connect to my computer that's called Tech Support. this is a host name for this computer. Now, not to be confused with the IP address. You can also connect using an IP address to a remote computer. So instead of just typing in tech support, which you would normally do when it comes to a business environment, you can also type in, and let's see, ping tech support. You can also use its IP address. And in our case, this is a version 6 IP address, which we would use to connect to that computer. So in a business type of environment, chances are you would see a normal, standard type of IP address that's just, regular version 4. And that's perfectly fine. So instead of using the host name, you would type in that IP address in here, and it would connect the same way. But normally, all you would do is just type in the host name, click connect, and then you can type in your login ID, which I already have. It's called YT login. And then you would type in your password, and it would connect just like this. Just a moment, let me switch my picture here real quick. There it is. Okay. I almost needed to troubleshoot that first. So this is what happens when you connect to a remote computer. Now, you can pretty much do everything that you would normally do, and that's the whole point of remote desktop video. So this is normal. But let's see what happens when I know that a computer is turned on and we try to connect to it. So my other computer is just called Kobuman, and on it I have the remote desktop is disabled. So when I try to connect to it now from this computer, it's going to fail. And we'll see what the errors are. You see, it says remote desktop can't connect to the remote computer for one of the reasons. Remote access to the server is not enabled. So what is that? What is that? Well, let's have a look. If I go to properties of this computer, so you go to properties of this computer, we can see, okay, I just want to make sure I have this. Okay, there it is. It says remote access to the server is not enabled. That means that when we go to advanced system settings here, okay, and it's asking me for admin privileges, so I can access this. If you go to the advanced system properties and go to the far right tab, which is called remote, this may be disabled like so, right? That might be the cause, and that's what that is talking about. I don't know if you saw that. It actually flashed it for a second. I thought I was going to disconnect it, although I didn't click apply or OK or anything like that. So, and the next thing that it says here, the remote computer the remote computer is turned off, which is not, or third, the remote computer is not available on the network. Right. So those are the key factors for a successful remote desktop session. However, if we go back to our question, it says here, keep in mind the remote computer is turned on and it's awake and it's on the same network. You see, it says keep in mind the remote computer is turned on, awake, and on the same physical network. So that's not the problem. So what would I do? What would I do? The way I would answer this question or troubleshoot this is, well, first of all, if this is an interview type of situation, I would, present them, few ways of going about it and what it may be. This is just to give the potential employer or a future employer an idea of how I troubleshoot things, and also that I am indeed knowledgeable and know what I'm talking about. So I would have first, second, third, and last example of what it could be, right? So my first idea would be, well, I would check to see if the remote computer's host name is part of the same domain. And the way you could check that is by going to the Active Directory. You see, you just see if if that host name is there. For example, we used here, Kobuman as the name of the host. So I would go inside of Active Directory and say, hey, is Kobuman, as in the name of the computer host name, is it in there or not? And then go from there. And then also I would check to see if the remote computer is enabled within the domain, even if it has been added. So of course, it could be part of the domain, but it could also be disabled. So once it's part of a domain or Active Directory, if you will, you can have a host name in there, but if it's disabled, then it's not usable, right? So second thing, I would try to ping the computer by using the host name. If an error comes up, if an error comes up, it would determine my next step. So we did a ping here for the tech support, and let's go ahead and do the same thing for the other one since we started doing that one. Let's ping Kobuman here. CMD ping Kobuman. See, there's another proof here that the computer is turned on. We just can't reach it. And this is a normal ping. It's a zero loss. Zero loss. That means the computer is turned on and everything's fine. There's connection there. We just cannot connect to it as we've demonstrated earlier. So what could be the problem? Let's go back to our answer for the second. For example, if the message says cannot resolve hostname, I would try pinging the computer using its IP address. So that kind of goes back to me connecting to a computer just by using an IP address. So, and that, my third part of that actually ties into that on what the reason for that is. If there is an issue with DNS, meaning that the main name service, I think I got there, DNS, the main name service, the main name system. I think that's what it actually stands for. Basically what that does is resolves, it basically takes the host name, in our case Kobuman, and tells the server or other computers on the network what the IP address for that is. So Kobuman as the name of the computer is basically just an alias, right? And the DNS basically takes that and it translates it and it forwards it to the correct IP address automatically. So if I can't connect to the Kobuman by using a host name, but I can connect using the IP address like this, if I can if I can highlight it. All right, Control C. If I can connect to it just like that without any problems using the IP address, that means that there is an issue with the DNS. That means the DNS is not doing its job. It's not taking Kobuman and translating it into the IP address, which it should be, right? So if that works, by using an IP address, then, that's fine for now, but there is an issue. Third, I would check for possible DNS issues if computer is reachable via IP address. And that's exactly what I talked about previously. If using IP address, I can connect to the remote computer or use remote desktop session, it would indicate a replication issue of the DNS server. So, right. So, another reason is, if the computer has, if there's an issue with the DNS, chances are it didn't replicate. So, maybe the computer just got added on there or it got moved or something like that, and the DNS server could not catch up with the change. It doesn't realize that it moved to another IP address. That could also be an issue. But generally speaking, if you cannot connect to the remote computer using just a host name, but you can with an IP address, that indicates just a DNS issue. And lastly, if I have physical access to the computer, I would check the DHCP settings or look at possible hardware issues or LAN connection issues. So basically, if I go to the computer physically, if I have physical access to it, if I am at the location there working for some kind of tech support there, I would go to the computer, log into it, and look at the DHCP settings. So what is that? Dynamic host configuration protocol settings that are on your adapter. So I'm going to look up my adapter here and look at DHCP settings. I'm going to go in here, change adapter settings. Here is my local Ethernet to, I'm going to look at the properties. And I'm going to look at the properties, and then I'm going to, let's see, where is it? Internet Protocol version 6. So we know we were using Internet Protocol version 6, so we're going to double check that, and then we're going to check at this. If this needs to be configured manually, we would have to do so. Otherwise, this should be just set to automatic, and this is usually what you would see in this type of DHCP setting. Now, not to be confused with DHCP server itself, that's different. That's your actual like switch on the network, or for example, your home router is a DHCP server, Dynamic Host Configuration Protocol. So I would make sure that looks good, and also look at possible hardware issues or LAN connection issues. So chances are maybe there's a bad cable, or you know, because if it's on the network and it's physically connected, then chances are this is not the issue, you know. However, it's unlikely if computer is reachable by IP address, or if it has been part of the network for some time. So the worst case scenario here being a DNS issue if you can't reach it with the host name only, and that's exactly what the question was about. So the point of this video is to kind of get you thinking on how host names work in relation to the DNS, and how this issue may come up whenever you use remote desktop sessions. All right, let's get to it. The entire building is switching over to Gigabit network, and you are to assist with the process. How would you handle this project? So you can see that this question is specifically tailored for somebody who does desktop support at the site. So meaning you're physically there, and then you are to assist with switching over to the Gigabit network. The reason you are to assist with the process is because you're not going to do the networking part of it, meaning that you won't be, you know, assigning IP addresses or anything like that. That's done by the network team. You are the desktop support guy, or tech support guy, if you will, that will basically run the cables and do everything else, which I will talk about here shortly. First, I would work with the network team to decide of the new IP network ranges. This is incredibly important. If your company has firewall settings or a firewall configuration that is specific to certain applications, certain websites, then you would need to know what the new IP network ranges are. This is something that you need to have anyways, but the main reason is to make sure that all of these applications that are used by people can also go through the firewall. So the old IP range had firewall settings set up for the old one. Now you need the new IP network ranges to inform the firewall team to make these changes so that applications and the websites and anything that's external will work properly. Also, sometimes you have to notify the external third parties that allow inbound connections from certain IP ranges. You need to let them know as well. And to make sure that certain machines receive static IP addresses. Now, I kind of touched on this on my previous video, which was related to setting up a printer on a network, which requires a static IP address, but that's not the main reason. I mean, that's one of the reasons, but the main reason being is servers. All the servers that you have at your location, they all need IP addresses, and they need to be configured with the new IP addresses, including printers. Second, if any network cables need to be upgraded, it will be coordinated with members of desktop support and network team. For example, Cat5e is a minimal cable rating for gigabit speeds. So the way you would do this is that you would have to make sure that it's at least Cat5e, which I believe is 1000 megabits per second connection speed, which is basically entry-level gigabit network speed. Otherwise, you would want to use Cat6. And you would coordinate this with the members of desktop support, meaning hopefully there's somebody else there that works with you. I mean, it may not be, if it's a smaller company, but if it's a larger company, there's probably other members there that, you may need assistance with, especially if you need to run the new cables through the building, which is a lot of work. And of course, you wouldn't coordinate this with the network team. Basically, you just let them know, okay, I've connected all of this, try these ports or something like that, and let's test it out, type of thing. Third, if any changes affects the printers and other static devices such as servers, this has to be communicated to the users and make appropriate changes to each machine. So this touches on exactly what I talked about earlier related to the static IP addresses. If any changes affect the printers, of course, you have to let the users know. You have to communicate this to the users or make the changes yourself and tell them, okay, this printer that's here is no longer using this IP address. So you have to go to their computer or tell them to do it and say, okay, you have to add the printer in there again because it's not going to work. It's just going to stop working because the address has changed. And of course, make appropriate changes to each machine. I was referring this to the users, but also this needs to be applied to the servers themselves as well, or any storage that needs to be, static. Lastly, the most important thing would be the testing part before deployment, because there's a chance that certain applications require firewall exceptions for their IP or a range of IP addresses. And this also refers back to the IP ranges that all the applications need to have a firewall exclusions, exceptions, or whatever you want to call it. We want to make sure that the new IP range and the IP addresses can go through the firewall. All right, guys, I hope you like this video. Share it with your buddies. I'd really appreciate it. I'd made 5 more videos of this, and there will be more. But thank you so much for watching. If you want to check those out, again, there will be here as I speak. And I wish you good luck, best of luck, enjoy your day. Bye-bye.